Greetings, beloved Star Child Rising. You are in Christina's Corner, and I am Christina. Welcome back to the podcast. I've said all along this show is about love, healing, empowerment, all that good stuff. And I get the opportunity to highlight and celebrate individuals who are out here using their gifts to uplift the world. Today is no different. Today, we're exploring the rich tapestry of life from the rural landscapes of Arkansas to the vibrant literary scene with the incredibly talented C.L. Bledsoe. I know him as Cortney. Cortney's journey is a testament to the power of storytelling, weaving together poetry, fiction, and personal experience into a compelling body of work. Raised on a rice and catfish farm in the Mississippi River Delta, Courtney's upbringing has deeply influenced his writing, particularly his evocative poetry collection, Riceland. He is the author of numerous books, including Naming the Animals, Last Stand in Zombie Town, and his newest poetry collection, Having a Baby to Save a Marriage. A 10-time Pushcart Prize nominee and winner of the Blue Collar Review's Working People's Poetry Contest, Courtney's work is both profound and accessible. He's also worn many hats, from musician to college counselor to educator to government contractor, enriching his perspective and fueling his creativity. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Courtney C.L. Bledsoe. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you for having me.
So glad to see you. It's been years. Well, we've been
Yeah,
in contact, but it's been years since we actually have seen each other.
yeah, it's been a long time. Uh, I miss Old Fields, but is it even still going? They
Yeah, yeah.
closed.
Old Fields is, it had its ups and downs, but it's making a pretty strong comeback. And
That's
so,
good.
yeah, the
Eh,
beloved community.
yeah.
So what we're going to talk about, what I like to do, Courtney, is I like to start from the beginning. I have six questions for you. And the
Okay.
first question is to take us back to when you were a boy, how you were raised, and how your upbringing on the farm impacted your writing. How did it all start?
Well, my childhood was equal parts idyllic and kind of dark. We lived in a red brick house on top of a ridge, and there's a lake right down the hill from us, and all this land, woods and all this land to play in and explore. My sister and I would go, try to find ghosts in the woods, and we would, explore and have a good time. But there were darker themes to it as well of my mother's illness. But I cover a lot of this in Riceland. Um, but my family were all storytellers. We were all readers. My dad would read like spy novels and stuff like that. My mom would read Harlequin romance novels, and my brother read westerns, and I read weird stuff that they didn't understand. Um, but yeah, we're all storytellers. We would around the farm, we would tell stories and jokes, and we're always ribbing each other. And uh we had so in the winters we sold catfish and buffalo fish. And they would just everybody would just be standing around while we had customers in, and sometimes a customer might bring a harmonica or tell a joke or whatever, and or bring a guitar, and it was really kind of idyllic. And then after uh close of day, my dad and his friends would sit around and tell stories, drinking and telling stories and everything. So um it really set me on the path.
But you had a lot of experiences and a lot of stories to kind of build your foundation
Yeah,
and kick your imagination off.
yeah, definitely. And the rhythms of storytelling and just the way to entertain an audience. Because if you told a bad story, everybody would let you know,
Hmm.
you know. So I,
And that rhythm comes through in your writing. Um, Whether it's your fiction or your poetry, you can kind of tell the rhythm and I'm going to try that in a little bit. Um, but you can kind of tell in your writing that you've got a flow to you. And you're really talented, Court. You really are.
thank you.
So thank you for sharing. The second question is, your work spans poetry, fiction, and even short plays. How do you navigate between these different genres? And what draws you to each form of expression? Do you find that certain stories or themes lend themselves more to poetry versus fiction? Just for example.
Yeah. Well, lately I've been writing more poetry and I've been trying to write comic books, which is a really
Ah,
hard thing to break into because you need an artist or you need to be an artist, and I'm not an artist. So, um, but yeah, they each kind of have a different taste to them. Um, you know, for me, poems tend to be kind of short bursts of energy. I tend to write them pretty quickly. I mean, I'll go back and revise it maybe for years, but that first draft usually comes out pretty quick. Um, and I'm trying to figure something out, like I've had an experience and I'm trying to figure out what it means, or I've encountered an idea or something and I'm trying to figure out what that means and how to live in the context of this experience as like a moral being, you know. Um Short stories are more a little bit more intellectual for me and less emotional. I've got a situation. It could be something I experience, and I'm just kind of trying to feel out um, what it what it means, but also, how would I live in that world or whatever. A lot of it is really kind of self-absorbed because I'm really trying to figure out how to live. Um, in this context. Plays, and I've written screenplays. Um, they're a lot more structured, and comic books. They're a lot more structured. Like I make an outline, and worked out the story. Whereas short stories and even novels, a lot of the time, I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants. Um,
okay. So when you're reading a short story or somebody else's poem, are you able to just kind of relax into it and read it, for lack of a better term, for what it is? Or are you trying to figure out where their head is and analyze the work?
if it's a good poem or story or whatever, then I should be able to do both. I can kind of look at the nuts and bolts of it, but also go along for the ride. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time, I am kind of focused on the structure or the character development or the pieces of it instead of the whole. It's hard to step back, especially with like television. When I watch television and movies, I can always see where they're going, and it's especially like procedural dramas and things like that. I just don't enjoy them because I know what's going to happen.
Right, right.
Mm. But a good poem, is surprising. Even as a poet, it's a good poem is surprising to you.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. Number three, you've had a diverse career, as I mentioned at the beginning, been a musician, teacher, college counselor, and now a writer. I met you, and we talked about this at Oldfields when we were working together, a very small boarding school in Maryland. And I got to know you a lot better when we took a group of students on a Freedom Ride, which was a civil rights experiential tour of the South. Remember we did that together and you co-chaperoned with me?
Yeah, that was so much fun.
It was. And I'm going to tell you from my heart, Courtney, that was one of my fondest memories to date. There was so much laughter, so much fun.
Remember that time when we had gone to, was it Sonic? It was some fast food place, and then we pulled in again, and we were told the kids we're just gonna get extra burgers for, all three meals. You get a burger, and they were so upset.
We had gotten to a point where we were just going to Sonic because it was like convenient and it was
Yeah,
everywhere. And, we were just driving and driving and driving. And and we conspired to
yeah,
go there again when they had a tantrum about it. And that was just so, so funny. Um, when they just wanted chicken,
yeah.
like fried chicken or something like that.
They
But
wanted to flirt with the guy at Popeyes. Remember when
yeah,
we were in Memphis and they were all flirting with that guy at Popeyes, and we're like, no,
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 I
no,
don't, I
no.
don't remember that, Court, but but I know we had a lot of experiences, a lot of driving, and a lot of fun. There was one point where we were sitting down and talking, and there was a lot of laughter, but there were some times where we had some deep conversations just by nature of the reason why we were doing, the
Yeah,
trip. Some of the conversations were very profound, but I remember asking you because you had just, your daughter was very young, and I asked you, how did the birth of your daughter change your life? And up until then, you were always very witty, always made a joke out of everything, and you just got quiet. And for a second there, I thought I offended you. And you just went into deep thought and see if you remember this. And you said, you know, it's like the volume of life was just turned down, and any other noise or distractions, I don't even notice because I'm focused on her. And that, like, your response, Court, it just took my breath away as a parent of a young daughter myself. I could totally, resonate with you when you said that. And it sticks with me to this day. So my question is, that was obviously the birth of your daughter was a watershed moment. How did having your daughter impact your writing? And are there any other watershed moments that inspired you in your writing career?
yeah. I think that it's still true what I said about how the world is sort of tuned out a little bit because of my attention on my daughter. I wrote a book about her. Having a Baby to Save a Marriage is a collection of poems. I mean, ostensibly they're about her, but of course, really they're about me and my reactions to her and our
Mm-hmm.
relationship. Um, which I did that because I wanted to capture, these moments because I knew they were fleeting. I mean, even now at 13, she's so much different than she was when she was younger, of course. And I could not have predicted some of the things that, have some of her interests and things like that. But I also noticed when I would read these poems in public, people really responded to them. People would come up to me crying and just really
Mhm.
touched by them. Um, and I was like, well, this is the thing that I care about now the most is my relationship with my daughter. So I should write about it. But yeah, having a kid changed my life. Um, there's been other watershed events. It's much of Riceland is about my mother's illness with Huntington's disease and how that sort of overshadowed everything else, you know, for the whole family. I mean, if you have a bad day at school, well, it doesn't really matter because your mom is dying. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? That's more important. That kind of idea. So that was a really big influence on me. Um, I think, let me look at my notes. I don't know. I think there have been a lot of watershed moments, but my daughter's probably the biggest one and the one uh, that I like the most. I mean, tragedies happen and those affect
Mhm.
you, but you know, my um, the birth of my daughter is really the most important thing I think that's happened in my life.
And does she like to read?
I read her one of the poems in the book one time, and it's it's a poem about her hair because she has this curly hair,
Yeah, it's
and
gorgeous.
yeah, and the poem was very surreal, and it was about her hair and like her hair is this um sort of otherworldly entity. She started crying and she freaked
Oh,
out. And she's like, "Is that what you think of me?" and all this. And I was like, "Oh my God, I can't let you read these until you're older."
she'll appreciate him when she gets older.
Yeah,
She's she's too young now, Court.
yeah.
But does she like to read?
She loves to read. She reads constantly. Um, Now she likes her phone a little bit better than reading, but she
Mhm.
still reads constantly. We
Okay.
have, when I have her uh, on weekends or whatever, or on holidays or whatever, we have a reading time before bed and we'll read together, but also sometimes I'll read things to her. She still lets me do that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. Um, okay, so let's go to this next question. Um, your poem. I wanted to read this poem and I wanted you to talk about your process of how you came up with it, or what's your process in general when
Yeah.
you start to write a poem. So I'm going to try it. So give me some grace, okay?
Okay.
The poem is called Banana for Scale. Okay. Banana, I'm nervous because you're looking at me.
Okay.
Banana for scale. Let's say you're tired, haven't slept well in months. Sleeping pills don't work. Warm milk under the pillow and reading show tunes in bed. 2 a.m. every night, a man comes to the door to ask you if you've seen the light. No, your eyes were closed. The only light is inside you. Not what he wants to hear. He never is gracious in his exit, always kicks the dog statue and steals the branch from the family tree. Somebody above you has a grudge. Somebody thinks you've been getting too big for your britches. Or maybe chaos has a new pen name. The doctors say they can't help you. The witches are too depressed to pick up the phone. You're trying to make it till spring. If you could only see the sun on your patio, you might be able to forgive.
Very good. Thank you.
So deep. I love that. So what's your process to come up with something like that?
A lot of the images, as weird as they sound, are just pulled from my life, and maybe I tweak them a little to make them into metaphors or whatever. But I hadn't slept in months when I wrote this, and it was a thing, you know. It was when you can't sleep for a couple days, that's bad. But when it gets to be months, you know, you get weird, and so that's what a lot of that was. Taking sort of my experiences and sometimes things that represent my experiences. The way my brain works is that symbolism is often more real to me than
Mhm.
reality, especially in writing. Um, you know, uh, let's see, the I'm looking at lines. Um, Somebody above you has a grudge. Well, that's because I'm blaming God a little bit because I haven't slept in a couple months, but also because my neighbors are loud above me. And sometimes it seems like they're doing it on purpose, you know. Um, uh,
And
the
do you have a
doctors say
dog statue?
I don't have a dog statue, but you know that's kind of a play on the idea of people kicking the dog when they
Right.
take out their problems on the pet or whatever. Um, because when you get desperate, sometimes you do bad things, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the witches too depressed to pick up the phone. I was dating a witch, so someone who was a witch, and she was, you know, really going through depression at the time. Um, but also, you know, there's a kind of paranoia to that line. Anyway,
That is
uh,
fascinating.
yeah, thank you. My
Just to
writing
kind of break it
process,
apart like that.
my writing process tends to be, for poetry, it tends to be pretty frenzied. Um, I just, you know, I got to get it down before I lose it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the inspiration or the understanding, I've achieved some sort of epiphany and I have to get it down, or I'm right on the edge of an epiphany and I gotta get over that hump. I gotta figure it out, you know. Um, but then, you know, I might revise it for years. Um, some things come out pretty much finished, but some things I might sit on it for 5, 10 years and it's
Really?
still not there.
Wow.
And then I
That's
might
really
do something completely weird with it to finally get it to work. So I don't know.
wow. That's really interesting. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I love
Yeah,
that poem, by the way.
thank
Um,
you.
and for those of you watching, I will have his Amazon author page link in the video description so you could get some more of his work. Really good stuff. Um, your writing, when I'm reading it, the few poems, um, and I forget the name of the book that I bought, but when I was reading it, to me, some stuff to me like poetry is just very hard for me to read, and I prefer nonfiction books
Yeah,
personally, because fiction, it's like you got to go through like, a million things before you get to what happens, and I just don't have patience for that, especially with
sure.
somebody that has ADHD and attentive. It's hard for me to get through the book and and capture everything the first time. So I got to read it several times over anyway. So in my mind, I really just want to read something that I know is true. Spending all my time. That wasn't true. But I know that I'm missing out on a lot of good, innovative and creative novels and things of that nature. So I do use Audible, and sometimes I read as well. And because I know you, and I consider you a dear friend, I have read your work, and I have not been disappointed. Um,
Well,
it's
thank you.
healing to me when I read it, just like that poem was, um, because although you explained, you know, what you were going through when you were reading it, that I had no idea, my perception of what it meant to me in my mind was healing. Because I was like, wow, this is really profound. This is really deep. Just thinking of, everything that you put into it and what it triggered in my mind, right? So, do you consider you have a lot of, like I said, you've been nominated for the Pushcart Prize 10 times and have received a lot of other prestigious accolades. Um, is the writing healing for you to write? Is it healing for you to write? And do you have any favorite authors that you
Yeah.
like?
I think, different pieces work in different ways. But I think ultimately I am trying, there's a kind of therapy to it, and I am trying to heal by writing about things and trying to reframe things sometimes, reframe experiences in a more um, helpful way. I
Mhm.
think one of my basic philosophies of writing or any kind of art is, does it help? Does it help people live? Does it help people cope and get through life? Is it helpful to them? And I know that's not everybody thinks like that, but that's something I think. I think it's got to kind of earn its place a little bit by being um, positive for people. Even a very negative kind of story, a dark story or whatever, I think still should have some positive element, even if it's just the idea of like minds coming together.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. And is there any authors that
Oh, any
you,
authors? I love one of my all-time favorite poets is Joe McDougall. Um, she's a little bit obscure. She's an Arkansas by way of Arkansas poet who moved to Kansas, and so she wrote about a lot of the stuff that I've written about, except a little more in depth because she spent her, she wrote about like being an Arkansas farm wife and things like that, and that's a perspective I don't have.
Mhm.
But she's also just really good. Whatever she's writing about, she's really good.
What's
Um,
her name?
Joe McDougall.
Okay.
Um,
I'll have to check that out.
yeah, and there's a ton of writers. Dean Young is very influential in my more recent stuff, like Banana for Scale. I like a lot of C.D. Wright, who's also from Arkansas. Um, Charles Wright, no, I don't think they're related, who teaches at University of Virginia. I'm not sure if he's still there, but he I'm not sure if he's even still alive, but he is very um I would like to say that I'm sort of similar to him because he does the surreal stuff and the southern stuff kind of hand in hand. But a lot of great writers, Terry Pratchett, who wrote these like fantasy parody novels. If you ever saw Good Omens, the TV show, Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett wrote it together, but I like to think the heart of it is really Terry Pratchett. He's a humanist writing about elves and dwarves and stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but he's very funny. They're parodies. And I like a lot of pretentious stuff. Milan Kundera, who won a Nobel, and Italo Calvino. This kind of magical realism.
Okay.
I'm all over the place. I think you should be.
Sci-fi.
I mean, what?
Sci-fi. Horror.
Sci-fi. I read comic books. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I read everything. I don't read a lot of romance, but you know, everything else.
Okay.
Nonfiction.
Um, all right. So when I reached out to you a while back when I was trying to write my first book, you gave me some advice that was very helpful. Basically, you said, I'm going to get turned down. Be prepared. You're going to get turned down a lot when I was trying to publish my book. But understand that just because you're turned down, it doesn't mean that the work isn't good.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. What advice do you have for aspiring writers, um, particularly those who are trying to find their own unique voice and navigate the challenges of the publishing industry? And what projects are you currently working on?
Um, I would say the most important thing about the publishing industry is you just have to be realistic. Um, the vast majority of writers don't make a living writing. They do something else, and even people that you see in bookstores, that some people who are famous as you can be as a writer, some of them don't make a living writing. They teach or they do whatever. They do other things. Some do, of course, make a living, but it's rare. Um, and again, that just because they reject you, I mean, to be blunt, they might not have even read it, or they might have read the first page and you're like, oh, we already did a book about whatever, something sort of similar, so we're not going to do that this year. Or, there are a lot of reasons why a book gets rejected, and um it not might just not be to their taste, and somebody else will love it. But finding your voice, that's tricky. Um and some people really struggle with that, and they can take other writers as models and things like that, which can be helpful. But I think the key is to be honest and to be sincere, like vulnerable. Uh,
Hmm.
you gotta bleed on the page sometimes. Um, you've gotta write about things that maybe are a little bit scary to write about sometimes, or are um, not your favorite things to deal with, but you got to explore it. I think you got to follow your obsessions. If you look at Dostoevsky, all but a couple of his books are really about the same thing. And
Mhm.
he was a great writer, and they're great books, but he's really exploring these ideas, and he's certainly not alone in that. He's just an example that comes to mind. Um, I think uh, I think you got to just keep doing it. You got to just, they talk about doing 10,000 hours of something before you get good at it. I don't know if 10,000 is really an accurate number, but you do got to just practice at things. You got to, whatever that means. Practice can be just telling stories or self-expression. Practice can be, getting at the ideas behind what you're writing and really exploring those and understanding those before you try to put them down. You got to live in that world, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and what am I doing? I forgot to answer that. I just sent off a manuscript to a publisher of poetry. called Self-Portrait is Mostly Light, which has love poems, which
Oh, wow.
I don't usually do a lot of love poems um, from a now failed relationship. But I'm happy to have some love poems in my repertoire. Um, so I'm waiting to hear back from them. Um, the poem you read, Banana for Scale, is the title poem of my hopefully next book, next poetry collection, um, which is a lot looser and more surreal and um, fun, I like to think. So I'm working on that.
So you work um, a regular job and also write, right? So how do you put in the time? Is it when you feel inspired to just write, or do you like designate a schedule of when you're going to write?
It's different. It depends on what I'm doing, what I'm working on. If I'm writing a novel, then I tend to have a schedule. I tend to write at work. Don't tell my bosses. But
Okay.
I tend to because I want to write in the morning, but I don't want to get up at 5 a.m. because I'm lazy. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I usually have a schedule, time. If I'm writing a novel and I'm gonna do say 1,000 words, I'm gonna do it in an hour. I'm gonna do it in the morning. Um, maybe I write a little bit over 1,000. Maybe it doesn't take me an hour to do it. Maybe it takes me a half hour if I'm really cooking, but probably not. Um, that kind of thing. If I'm writing poetry, it's much looser. Um, because it's really hard to with a novel there's a structure, you've established a story so it can keep going. It's not that hard to build on it and keep it going. With poetry it's fresh every day, so it's hard to you got to come up with a new idea every time. um, Hopefully something that's interesting and powerful to you, so it's hard to just sit down and say I'm going to do a poem a day. People do it, but it's hard for me.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't know why. I just picture you as someone who, maybe with a cup of coffee over the weekend, say, well, I got a couple hours here. Let me just see what I can come up with, as
Yeah.
opposed to, between 10:15 and 12:45, I'm gonna sit down and make myself work.
When I'm doing poetry, it's more like the, cup of tea over the weekend. Um,
Hmm.
because because I finally get a chance to think, you know. I can actually just think for a minute instead of just focusing on work. Um, that's when I tend to write poetry.
Okay. Well, I will look forward to the new love poems. I'm
Yeah,
excited to see that. And
thank you.
the new book with um, that you just talked about, with the banana poem in there. Banana for Scale. I want to get that one too. And maybe I may be inspired to like try some poetry sometime myself. You
Yeah,
never know. Um, it's inspiring to me.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking time to talk to me, and I hope
Yeah,
that
thanks
we
for
can
having
do it
me.
again, and catch up on what's been happening, um, and your new work. Maybe you're getting into comic books or whatever as well. I like to keep tabs on what's happening with you and keep connected.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was great to see you.
You
Love
too.
to Ellie, Jillian, when you next time you see her.
Yeah,
Um, love you guys, and always remember and treasure the memories that we had. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you to all the listeners. And you can check out his information on the video description. And love and light to you. And see you next time on the next podcast. Good night.